Then after he went for the postdoctorate fellowship during 2005 March to 2006 August at Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, India. During 2006 September to 2008 September, he worked as a PDF, International Center for Theoretical Physics, Italy. During 2008 to 2013, he joined as an assistant professor in Department of Aerospace Engineering at IIT Madras. Later on, he is promoted as an associate professor in 2013, and currently he is working as a professor since 2018. He has many publications on his name, almost half century, 50 publications in various international journals and international conferences. He has published his papers. His area of research is computational fluid dynamics, aerodynamics, flow instabilities, transition to turbulence, thermal convection, magnetohydrodynamics. Sir, it's really a matter of pleasure for us to have a speaker like you. I request Samin sir to start his presentations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Maharishi Thakur, for the nice words. And also thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. Am I audible first?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. Okay, so let me share the screen first. Okay, is this visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so for the next 1.5 hours, I'm going to discuss something on vortex-dominated flows, which is quite common in nature and engineering. So the work that we have done on these flows for the last 5-6 years is what I'm going to present here. This is essentially the PhD work of Manjul Sharma and Vishnu, who were PhD students in the department here at IIT Madras. So, so these slides are all taken from Manjul and Vishnu. So to start with, what are vortex-dominated flows as compared to, so let's say, your turbulent flows or some other scenarios. So the vortex is something that we are struggling to define. What is a vortex? Say the community for the last 100 years or maybe more than that are struggling to define what is a vortex. So the consensus is that if you have coherent structures which is rotating about some axis, you call it as vortex. That's a very vague way of defining vortex. So we are not going to attempt at redefining the vortex, but we are going to see if given by this vague definition of vortex, where do you find these kinds of things? For example, the picture that here in the left, you can see my cursor.
Yes, sir, we can see.
Yeah, okay. So these long cloud structures are results of instability waves that is occurring in the atmosphere in the early part of the morning day, typically just before the winter. This is from Australia. This is commonly called as morning glory, and these are hundreds of kilometers. This stretches to hundreds of kilometers. So these are very coherent structures, which has its own vorticity, which I will define it in the coming slides. So there is a kind of rotation that's going on in this particular structure, and you call this as a long vortex. It's actually an instability wave that is moving forward, and if your aircraft is caught in this, it's going to be very, very fatal. So you want to avoid these kinds of waves when you take off or land. So that's a kind of vortex, So this is a very long structure. Typically, these kinds of vortices happens in all kinds of scales. It's not just these long structures. It can happen in very, very small scales as well. For example, in turbulent flow is a mix of all kinds of vortex eddies, which are of from the scale of the container to the scale where you can go down to the scale of the viscosity. So it's from large scale to very small scale. You can expect these kinds of structures that's happening. And the example that's shown here is a large scale structure. If you look at the picture on the left, so there's a white fluid and there is a black fluid underneath. So when I tilt this particular setup, the white fluid will move from left to right, and this black will move from right to left. And you see this so-called Kelvin-Helmholtz instability waves, which are again vortex flow. So that's what I have done here. So the camera is also tilted along with it, so you don't see the frame getting tilted. So you have these kinds of structures forming here, and they are all vortex that is sitting there. So these are at different scales. Same happens here in the figure. This is the atmosphere of the Jupiter, and the Jupiter atmosphere has these kinds of differential motion, unlike what we see in the other planets. So these atmosphere, there are streams that's going from left to right. There are streams going from right to left, and you see all kinds of vortices. The one that you see big red vortex is the so-called Jupiter's giant red spot, which has been there for the last 350 years of observational data. So these are the longevity of these vortices are very high. So what are what are the reasons for these? When do these vortices break down? All kinds of scenarios are something that you see in this picture. This is one of the recent publications that has come out. So this bird is actually making some, voice, some sound, which probably to attract his mate. But what you see here from the picture is the small vortex that's coming out of its mouth, and you have these vortex rings, like the smoke rings that people make when you smoke a cigar. So these are one of the reasons of different kinds of modulations of the voice, the acoustics associated with this. And they are all of matter of interest and engineering as well. It's not just the nature, it's also part of the engineering process where you need to understand the acoustics of these things. Okay, for example, that you see here, you have a helicopter, and when it rotates, it creates a long vortex around this particular structure, which is actually taking used as take a lifting mechanism that's associated with the fan blades. Unlike the fixed wing aircraft, this is the rotation itself creates a vortex, and the vortex is creating a lifting mechanism, as you would see here in this movie, where you see this helicopter. I am not showing the blades here, but this blades is going to create a long vortex, something like this, and it creates the lifting mechanism associated with this. If you look at this particular, I missed one. Yeah, this is one of the interesting videos that I wanted to show. So these long vortices associated with engineering flows, especially in aircraft, is going to be really important for the lift and the drag mechanism associated with the aircraft. So for example, if you see here, this is a YouTube video, so anybody can get this. So if you see this, these edges will create a long vortex that is going to come. So the aircraft is moving into the cloud, and it's going to create a large vortex behind the aircraft. Let me go to see, for example, here in this picture, this vortex is coming out of the control surface that is here, and this is a long vortex. And this long vortex has a problem because that's going to add to the drag force of the aircraft. So you may want to avoid these kinds of large, long vortices, especially the one that typically happens near the wing tip. Here, it's not going to happen. These are called winglets that is made to avoid these kinds of large vortices. So in some of the aircraft, you don't see these winglets, and that happens. You know, there is a low pressure here. There is high pressure at the lower surface and a low pressure on the top surface. So there will be fluid that is going from the low pressure to the high surface through the sides or the tips of the airfoil, which creates a large vortex, which is what you see as you know, in the previous picture. When it moves into the cloud, you see two vortices that's coming out of the aircraft, and that is going to be fatal for the aircraft that is behind. So if it is happening near the airport, say for example, I don't know how to cut the voice. Yeah, so you can see these kinds of vortices, you know, happening. Let's look at the voice is slightly. Maybe I should cut the voice for the next presentation. So look at these large vortices that's being made behind the. So these are happening at all the. Let's wind up this. Yeah. So let me push ahead and see. Yeah, you can see the large vortex that is happening here. And if these kinds of vortices happen near the airport, then it's going to be very fatal, you know. So let's push ahead, and maybe I'll stop and discuss this. So what happens is, if you have these kinds of large vortex that's happening at the airport, because the oncoming aircraft behind it has to wait for some time till this vortex dies down, you know, you have to pay the taxes to the airport, you know, for making the other plane wait to land or take off, you know. So that is adding up to your, you know, airport taxes, which is essentially being levied on the passenger ticket pricing. So every aircraft manufacturer would like to kill these kinds of vortices, which defines actually the class of the aircraft. So you want to make the aircraft class as lower as possible, so that you don't have these kinds of vortices happening near the airport. So the breakdown of these vortices, that's a very important phenomena, and fundamentally in fluid mechanics point of view and engineering point of view, it's going to be you know, it's a pertinent question that people are asking for the last several years. Okay. And similar things happen in the atmosphere, geophysical flows. These are large vortices that's happening near the North Pole. Okay, and that sucks in. These are long vortex of the size of the atmospheric thickness, which is around 10 to 20 kilometers long. And this sucks in the cold temperature from the upper atmosphere, stratospheric atmosphere, and then push it to the lower atmosphere. And so these always form. But because of global warming, what happens is these kinds of structures breaks. For example, if you look at the simulation data that has been obtained from NASA, which is, you know, which they have recalculated how the structures behave from the satellite data that's available. So if you look at the date that is given here, in about a month or so, this large structure breaks, and these three columns, okay, which is you know, huge in size and, you know, kilometers long, anchor itself in some particular part which you may not want them to anchor. So in this particular case, 2019 winter, these anchored itself in the central Canada and the central United States, which brought a huge, you know, extreme cold temperatures, which is not something that is wanted. And this is actually connected to the global warming of your atmosphere and the global warming phenomena, which it's again people disagree, but that is typically what it's thought to be. And this is another example. This is volcanic eruption. So this volcano emits some gas intermittently, and when it emits a gas, it emits something called these vortex rings. So these are again axial vortex, but it's connected back to itself. It forms a beautiful ring, which is of this kind, and along with this ring, you entrain the particle, and this particle is carried forward to a longer distance, okay, as compared to a columnar vortex. So the breakdown of these vortices, again, it's a very pertinent question that you would ask, because that's again an engineering problem where you would see that kind of vortex inside a combustion chamber or in an internal combustion engine, where the fuel is injected intermittently, and then that creates a vortex ring, and how much fuel that this particular vortex ring can carry forward into the oxygen filled chamber. So the question we ask is what are the tools that we need to understand these kinds of flows. So I will just go through some of the basics of vortex and vorticity. So I will assume that most of you know fluid mechanics quite well, and the discussion that I have made here is with that particular assumption. But if you have any questions, please stop me and ask at any point of time. We can stop and discuss. There is no rule that I should finish this 58 slides. We can stop at 30 slides, no problem. So just stop me whenever you think there is an inconsistency in my speaking. Okay. So so the velocity field usually, when you take the curl of the velocity field, you get a quantity called vorticity, and this vorticity is what defines the rotation characteristics of the fluid flow. And this vortex is one of the fundamental quantities that you try to compute, or you try to understand. So if I have a streamline, if I assume that all of you know streamline, there is something called vortex line, where the circulation around that line is constant. This vorticity, which is has some direction of the circulation, can create a velocity somewhere farther down, which is similar to the charge and the current that you have in a conductor. So the rule that we have there is the Biot-Savart law. You have the equations that set. So for any current carrying conductor, there is any charge carrying conductor, you create a current elsewhere. So similar to that, there is if I have a columnar vortex here, and that vortex is going to create a velocity somewhere further down, and that depends on the distance between that particular point and the vortex. So this is what is beautifully given in this particular law, which is a inviscid law. There is no viscosity associated with it. When you have a viscosity associated with it, there are small changes into the development of these vortices or these vortex, or the velocity that you are going to gain at some particular particular distance downstream from your vortex line. Okay, so this line which I have written as vortex filament line, this are also lines which carry the fluid particles. Like for example, in the picture that I have shown here, the smoke particles are carried by this particular vortex filament. So these vortex, the particle filaments are also the vortex lines, as it's been shown many years before by Kelvin and Helmholtz. And the law that we have is Kelvin-Helmholtz law. So there are several rules associated with this vortex element. I'm not going into that. That's given by for an inviscid flow that is given by Helmholtz. Now let's go to the Navier-Stokes equation and see the importance of this particular quantity called vorticity. Okay, so the left-hand side is the advection of the velocity or the momentum, and the right-hand side you have the pressure balanced by the pressure gradient and the viscous forces. So the nonlinear term here, u dot grad u. Okay, so this quantity can be split into a few other terms. So if you use the vector identity, I would get something like this. So your vorticity is coming directly from this nonlinear term, okay? And I can write this as vorticity omega cross u, which is what we call as the Lamb vector. So if you have a Lamb vector, large Lamb vector, then it's associated with large nonlinearity. So I go ahead and write a transport equation for the vorticity. How do I do that? I go back to the Navier-Stokes equation, take a curl of this entire equation and group the terms with curl u, which is what I would get here. Okay, so I have the unsteady part of the vorticity development, evolution of vorticity with time, and then the nonlinear terms, and then the viscous terms. The grad p terms is assumed 0 here because it's something called you know, your density is not changing with other parameters like temperature or concentration or any other quantity. So your pressure and density goes in the same fashion. So those fluids are called barotropic fluids. So in barotropic fluids, when you take the curl of this is curl of just a gradient, which is always 0. Okay, so there is the density, I can take it out. If I have a constant density or the density is a function of pressure alone, then I can take this function, and turns out to be you know, outside the curl operation, and you have the curl of the gradient of a scalar, which is going to be 0 always by the vector identity. So I have assumed that kind of fluid here, and I don't have a pressure term here. So if you look at this term, your evolution of vorticity is you know, is dissipated by your viscosity and is transported elsewhere in the fluid by the velocity terms, okay, which I can rewrite in this particular fashion. Okay, so I take again a vector identity. Here again there are 2 more terms which I have to assume something called del dot v, the del dot u equals 0, which is the incompressibility condition. So those terms del dot u I have assumed to be 0, and del dot omega is always 0 because my omega is defined as this. So if I take del dot of omega, and on the right hand side also if I take del dot of this curl of u, this is going to be 0 by vector identity. So this is always 0 irrespective of whether it's compressible or incompressible flow. So I have assumed those two, del dot omega equals 0 and del dot u equals 0 in the expansion of this identity, and I get these 2 terms. Okay, and I put this term on the left hand side, and this particular term comes along with the material derivative of the vorticity. So I can use this. There is a sign problem here. Yeah, there is a sign problem here. This should be minus. So there is a omega d omega by dt, which is the material derivative or the evolution of vorticity with respect to time, and then you have this quantity called c, which is what we call as the stretching or tilting term. Okay, so the importance of stretching or tilting term is if I have a vortex tube and if I stretch that vortex, say for example, if I have a vortex tube here, if I stretch this particular one, that is going to change the vorticity. And that, how does it change? It changes in this particular fashion. Okay, and that does so the shape changes, the vorticity being brought about by the shape changes of your vortex tube or vortex filament also contribute to the evolution of vorticity itself, and that is what it says. Okay, so both these terms is coming from the nonlinear terms. Your C and the Lamb vector, both are coming from your nonlinear terms. And if I go ahead and try to see the kinetic energy in an inviscid flow, there is no way your kinetic energy can dissipate. Okay, for an incompressible flow, there is no way the kinetic energy can dissipate unless there is a viscosity. So your evolution of your kinetic energy is balanced by the viscous forces that's associated with it. And I can rewrite that in terms of vorticity, where I get something called the inner product of vorticity or the dot product of vorticity. So omega dot omega is what we call as the entropy. So the entropy is directly correlated to the kinetic energy of your flow. So you look like it looks like vorticity is coming everywhere you look at it, and all the physical fundamental quantities that you know, you can rewrite in terms of vorticity, and that looks more fundamental as compared to, you know, so the velocity of the flow. So you would like to see vorticity as one of the parameters that is ruling the fluid flow. So am I going fast, or is that okay? Or
yes, it is fine. It is fine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So if this is okay, then the term here, sorry. So the term here, the entropy, I would like to, you know, find an evolution of the term entropy here, and I can easily get that. This is in the index notation, and sorry for the mix-up of the notations here. So I can write the evolution of entropy, which is again the omega I, which is, you know, omega dot omega. You can get the material, you know, derivative of entropy in this particular fashion, and then you can go ahead and see how the vortex structures or stretching a vortex or tilting a vortex contributing to the kinetic energy. Okay, so you find the stretching term or the entropy term, entropy balance term, and then if you know the entropy balance, which you know that it's coming from your stretching and tilting, you can you know the way the kinetic energy is going to evolve. Okay, so that's precisely what is going to get you into entropy. In turbulence, this equation is going to be very, very important, because the entropy of the fluctuating quantities actually creates the dissipation terms, and it also contributes to the production terms, production of turbulent kinetic energy, and so on and so forth. So this equation that I have written here is again a very fundamental equation, which is typically not discussed in a fundamental course on fluid mechanics. So I just thought I will put it here. And if you come back to the nonlinear terms between you know, the curl of omega, the u cross omega, and then I define something called u dot omega, then I can write an identity. This is nothing but, you know, cos square plus sine square equals 1 if I divide this with the entire equation with u square and omega square. So this identity, which is similar to your cos square theta plus y sine square theta equals 1, you have this particular balance of helicity, which I am going to define it now. Okay, balance between H and L, which is the Lamb vector. So if the Lamb vector is high, the helicity has to go down, and if the helicity is high, the Lamb vector has to go down. So if you look at this term u dot omega, it tells you how the vortex tube is getting a torsion. It's getting winded and unwinding of this particular filament is what you call as the helicity, or the helical nature of the velocity vector and the omega vector. So the alignment between velocity vector and the vorticity vector is what we call as the helicity. So helicity, you have the total helicity if you integrate it for the entire volume, but we'll work on the differential quantities. So we will work on the local helicity, which is what we call as the helicity density, which is omega dot u or u dot omega. Okay, so this is going to come in our discussion later on, if we have time. Okay, so that is what I have for the fundamental part of the helicity. Then with this background, we look into something called the axial vortices. So axial vortices, as I've told you, it's a long columnar vortex kind of thing for the in the nature or in engineering that you have seen. So for example, if I have a large delta wing is what we use for the fighter aircrafts and other things. So if I put this in a wind tunnel with a smoke that is coming from the leading edge, so there are two kinds of vortices, one on the left wing and then the right wing, okay, or the top wing and the bottom wing in this case. So you have a long vortex kind of thing that is forming here. This is a very so unlike in the other aircraft where you have a large aspect ratio, here in the delta wing, these vortices are itself the lift generating mechanism. So you want this vortex to be on the top of the wing for a long time so that you get a appropriate lift. And if somehow, if the vortex breaks or somehow there is a bursting of the axial vortex, then the lift on that particular side will go down, which can affect the controllability of your aircraft. So this stability of this vortex or the longevity of this axial vortex is again an engineering problem. And in the aircraft jargon, the breakdown is what we call as the bursting of this particular vortex. Okay, so the bursting and the, if you read bursting somewhere and vortex breakdown somewhere, they actually mean the same thing. Just that the scenario is slightly different. Breakdown is usually used for geophysical flows and fundamental fluid mechanics, whereas bursting is very specific to what you see in the aircraft industry. Okay. Now these kinds of vortex breakdown has been reported long back, but it was never called as breakdown. So for example, some 200 years, more than 250 years before, there was somebody called Michaux who was sitting at the port of Nice and drawing all these kinds of axial vortices, the water spouts that you see in the port of Nice. So this was very important for the ships that is wanting to cross the port. So he was associated with the meteorological department, and there was no other measurement instruments or photography. This is before the advent of photography. So he was sitting there and sketching, making these sketches. Okay, and Nice was again a place of during the Renaissance. Nice has played a very important role. So sketches are slightly more accurate than the artistic value that you have here. So you have a large bubble kind of structure here and somewhere here. Okay, so all these are seen in those water spots, which is what has been a little more modern. Say, for example, nearly 200 years later, you had this picture that is seen in a tornado, where you have these kinds of breakdown structures or breakdown bubbles, as we call it now, has happened here, which is similar to what Michu had drawn 250 years back. So these kinds of structures do happen, and why does this happen is one of the main questions. Is it desirable to have this? For example, in the delta wing, it's not desirable, but in a tornado, it's desirable. So because you break away, you want the tornado to break off and then dissipate. So that is important there. So in some cases, it's desirable, some cases it's not desirable. So you want to see how or what conditions these are. So vortex breakdown in general is defined as some change in the shape of or the structure of the vortex core. Okay, we don't know what that is, but there are some definitions like a stagnation point somewhere along the axis of the vortex is what we will follow here. And we also know what would be the velocity at the boundaries of these bubbles. Okay, again, it can be, there are different ways of defining the boundaries, but we'll follow one or two things and try to study what how the shape changes with respect to other flow parameters. And there are different kinds of flow breakdowns. So the one that you see here is the bubble type breakdown. In a long pipe, you will see these kinds of spiral breakdowns. And there are also scenarios where you will get these kinds of double helix breakdown if you have a spiraling flow in a pipe or in a long nozzle flows. Okay, so we are going to study this type of breakdown, a bubble type of breakdown. So in this talk, I am going to present only this particular portion, okay, where the bubble type of breakdown. And the most of the remaining talk, it's part of these two publications that has come out. So we take a model problem. Instead of going for a large atmospheric scenario or engineering setup, we take a model problem, try to analyze how this simple, we are actually dissecting the larger problem into a smaller problem and try to see what is the physics you can get out of the vortex core and the breakdown of the vortex core. So what we have taken here is it's cylinder, then you rotate the top cylinder. If you rotate the top cylinder, you create an axial vortex that is coming here at along the axis, and you try to study on what scenarios, what rotation speeds you have the axial vortex. So in this case, we have also heated the the bottom portion and the lower portion so that it can simulate the actual scenarios in, say, for example, tornadoes. Whenever they hit on a plane which is at a different temperature than the fluid flow. So you want to have the balance between, say, the buoyancy force that is affecting the vortex and the rotation speed of the flow. So that is decided by this particular setup, which is something called Vogel-Escudier flow. I will discuss that in the next slide. So this setup is going to create this axial vortex, and we are going to study the scenarios in which these vortex breaks down into bubbles, as I have shown here. Okay. So the governing equation that I'm going to use is the incompressibility mass conservation equation, which is del dot U equals 0. And then I have the momentum equation. So I get these non-dimensional numbers if I scale my length using the height of the cylinder and the velocity using the rotation speed and the speed generated by the buoyancy. So this second part of your velocity is what is common to the Rayleigh-Bénard community, and this is what is common to the rotation dominated flows. So you have this U reference, or the scaling factor for the velocity, and of course the time is just the ratio of the two. Okay, so I have substituted in the Navier-Stokes equation these two scalings, and I obtained this. And the temperature is again scaled by the top and bottom temperature, hot and cold, with the delta T that is happening between the two plates. Okay, so that will give me this kind of non-dimensional number, where if I put Reynolds number equals 0, I get back the Rayleigh-Bénard flow, which is quite familiar to most of you. If I put Rayleigh number equals 0, then I get the Vogel-Escudier flow, the classical Vogel-Escudier flow without the heating. Okay, so that is the idea of this particular non-dimensionalization number. And we solve this in the cylindrical coordinates, the finite difference, central second order scheme. I will not go into that. This is a standard technique. We have not done anything new in the technique. We have just taken the technique available, which has already been published and used by several people. So we have just taken that method and try to see the physics of what we are doing. I will skip this as well. So I will start with something where there is no heat. So you have this setup. I have the cylinder. Then I rotate the top cylinder. I get this flow, where when I rotate this, the fluid here is thrown to the outside radius, and it creates a spiral at the near top region, and it hits the sidewall and goes down. And once it goes down, there are fluids coming from all around the sidewall, and they meet at the axis, and that's been pushed up so that it creates a long thin vortex at the axis. Okay, that is what is shown here. This red line can be assumed as a vortex, and it is spiraling upward. Okay, so the parameter that you want to vary here is, one is the shape of the cylinder, okay, or which means the ratio of the radius to the height, which is the aspect ratio. So depending on the aspect ratio, this structure can be different, and depending on the flow speed, the the structure can be different. So the two parameters that we study here, Reynolds number and the aspect ratio. So I have kept the Rayleigh number to be 0 in the first part of the talk, and if we have time, we will go to the other part as well. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to show you the different scenarios, different topology of the flow, topology of the breakdown bubble, and the physics that is associated with it, and the different regimes associated with it. Okay. Okay, any questions here? Maybe we can take a pause. I can drink some water.
Yes, any participant having any question?
Yeah, any question?
Yes, anyone having any query or question?
Yes, please.
Sir, I want to ask about what you have said about delta wing aircraft.
Okay.
So, what will happen when we use canards in delta wing aircraft? What is the effect of vortex flow?
I didn't understand. What is, you use what?
Canards.
Ah.
Canards were used in delta wing aircraft.
Ah, okay.
So
that is only for the tip. That is only for the tip. Okay. So, your tip vortex would, be the strength of the tip vortex would be less. Okay, that's all it typically is. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Simply put, that is how it is.
Sir,
yeah, please.
Sir, why vortex generation in delta wing is not desirable? Like vortex is creating after passing the wing, right?
Vortex breakdown is not desirable. Vortex is desirable. You need the vortex to generate the lift, because unlike the rectangular wing or the wing with some large aspect ratio, the mechanism of lift is slightly different in delta wing, and you need that vortex to have a lift, okay, to have an appreciable lift. So you don't want that vortex to break down. So you don't want a breakdown scenario in a delta wing. That is what I said when it's not desirable. Okay, so the breakdown is not desirable. You want the
Sir, that vortex should be at the leading edge or at the trailing edge?
it is actually coming from the leading point. It's a delta wing. So from the leading point itself, it starts coming towards.
Okay, sir. Thank
Is that, am I clear to you?
you. Yes, sir.
Okay.
So one more question.
Yeah, sure.
So what is the physical meaning of entropy?
Okay. You can see my slide, or
Yes, sir, we can see.
okay. So, so if you look at this entropy is omega dot omega, which is the dot product of vorticity with itself. Okay. So when you have u dot u, what does it mean? It's a kinetic energy, right? It's u square by 2, which is the kinetic energy. Now, omega dot omega, you can actually relate it to the kinetic energy evolution rather than the kinetic energy. Okay, and that is why it is important than the kinetic energy itself. You are worried about kinetic energy evolution than the kinetic energy itself in a fluid flow, or the material derivative of kinetic energy rather than the kinetic energy itself, because kinetic energy of a fluid doesn't mean, in a flow, kinetic energy doesn't mean anything. What you need is the evolution of kinetic energy. So that is related to entropy rather than your velocity.
Okay. So when we derive this Navier-Stokes equation in the stream function vorticity formulation,
But once again, I didn't follow.
when we convert Navier-Stokes equation into the stream function vorticity equation,
Okay.
so at that moment we are also getting such term. So this is something new term that I come to know.
Oh, I see. Okay. In vorticity, when you convert to vorticity stream function, will you get entropy? I'm not sure of that.
No, we don't get entropy. We got del square omega. So that is the
Del square omega is fine. Del square omega is your viscous terms can be written in terms of del square omega.
yes.
Yes. Yeah. But that's still vorticity. It's not entropy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So if you read Turbulence by Davidson, okay, there is a book by Davidson. The book title is Turbulence. The first chapter or second chapter actually deals with vorticity and entropy quite nicely. So if you know the index notation, I think you should read that chapters so that you will get a good grip on it. Okay, but it's written in index notation.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, anything else? Okay. Okay. So maybe we can continue. So you can stop me at any point of time. Okay. So all these, for example, these questions, you can stop me at the point where we were discussing entropy itself. Okay. So that would have made the presentation lively. Okay. So please stop me whenever you feel so. Okay. So I will continue with the presentation. Okay, so you can see my slide, I hope.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Yeah. Okay. So this the next 10 minutes or so, or maybe slightly more than that, is the PhD work of Manjul Sharma. So, so what he has done is he has taken this Vogel SQDA flow setup and created this vortex, and masked in the parameter Reynolds number and in aspect ratio, and identified several new scenarios, new regimes. So we have validated the code with SQDA's original publication that came in '84. So what he has done is just a flow visualization. So all he has done is he has masked in several aspect ratio and Reynolds number, and you have photos of this dye visualization. Okay, so the left side is the SQDA's original figure, and the right side is our computation. So our computation is shown using the streamline plots, and the SQDA's flow is the dye visualization. This being a steady flow at this particular values of Reynolds number and aspect ratio, which again I will discuss in the next slide, why it is steady. So you have the particle lines and the streamlines are matching perfectly well. And you also have another set of experiments, PIV experiments, where they have measured the velocity, axial velocity, and then we have compared with that. So the lines are our computation, and the cross products, the cross simples are all their data, or the simples are all their data. Okay, so that is many years later to SQDA. Okay, so with I trying to convince that the code is working fine. Okay, so I just move ahead and show you that this particular map, which is going to be our central theme. So you have in the x-axis, you have the aspect ratio, which is nothing but the ratio of height by radius, height to radius, and then the solid lines are the boundaries where you have the breakdowns. And what SQDA has done is he has put dye in the flow and injected that along the axis. Okay, and then he identified the bubbles, the location and the region where he found the bubbles, and marked all those points here. So for example, aspect ratio 2 and a point here, you will not see any breakdown. You will see only a thin vortex line. Or aspect ratio 3, a Reynolds number somewhere here, you will not see any breakdown. You will see a thin line. But at the boundary here, say for example here, at aspect ratio 2, somewhere here, okay, that is where you will just about to see a breakdown. And well inside this line, you would see a single bubble. Okay, so he have identified all the single bubble regime and put it inside this loop. And likewise, he had done for the 2 bubble regimes and put it inside this particular loop. And the third one here. And this is the pioneering publication from SQDA, where he had just this series of pictures. Okay, beautiful pictures, but only pictures. There is no quantitative measurements of any of the quantities. Okay, so just pictures and count the number of bubbles, put it here. Okay, and you have this line demarcating where the breakdown is. So if you keep increasing, for example, 1.5, you keep increasing the Reynolds number, above which you don't see any breakdown. It's a scenario that computationally also we have seen. So what Manjul has done is this. He has simulated and expanded this and to several scenarios, several parameters, and you first of all you identify the similar regimes which SQDA has done, and in addition to that, there are new scenarios. So these new scenarios, this classification is his contribution, and identification of this regimes are also his contribution. That is actually submitted in the thesis. Okay, so I'm going to discuss these different regimes one by one, maybe one slide each. So you have no breakdown, which is the hash region, then single breakdown or steady axisymmetric breakdown in these black squares. Then the blue triangles are your unsteady axisymmetric. Then you have unsteady asymmetric flows and all sort of things. I will discuss that one by one. Okay, and some of these structures have already been seen, but they have not classified it. So they have seen that, you know, at some point you would see some unsteadiness that is being reported. There are some waves that is being reported, but there is no what do you say as the larger picture of the flow regimes. Okay, so we go into the first regime, which is steady axisymmetry. So for all these combination of aspect ratio and Reynolds number, what you see here is a steady flow. At any point of time, you will see this structure. It's not a function of time, and it is axisymmetric, which means that it's not changing with the theta direction. So it just stays there. And you have scenarios of single bubble, you have scenarios of two bubbles, and so on. Okay, and if you go to unsteady axisymmetric, this is very interesting because it's an axisymmetric flow because there is no variation in theta, but it's a unsteady flow. So for example, if you look at this bubble oscillates, this breakdown bubble oscillates in time, and then you see these contours which are axisymmetric. These are so this bubble is identified, for example, in the previous picture also. The bubble is identified by the surface of axial velocity 0. So along this bubble, your uz, or the z is the axial direction. So your uz is 0 along the surface of this bubble, and that's how you have identified the bubble. There are several ways of identifying. This is what we have followed, which is what we think it is the correct way, but we don't have a proof of why it should be correct. We will also discuss that this also correlates with the helicity definition, and so we think this is more correct than the other methods, which is, for example, using the streamlines. So if you look at this, you see this bubble oscillates, and if I put a probe somewhere here, okay, so a point where you measure the velocity and then try to see the oscillation, this is how it looks like. So your magnitude of velocity is going to oscillate something like this. Okay, it's a periodic oscillation, and in the nonlinear dynamics jargon, this is a limit cycle. Okay, so you have a limit cycle at this particular combination of Reynolds number and aspect ratio. So you have the oscillation, and if I take the Fourier transform, then I would get this frequency, which is the dominating frequency, which is the oscillating frequency. Okay, but it is axisymmetric. It's not changing in theta. There is no variation of theta. So dou by dou theta of these quantities are 0. When it goes to the next regime, where you have the unsteady axis asymmetric, there is a variation in theta. If you look at this picture, there is a clear variation of quantities. This is uz, and these velocity contours are showing you some variation in, and this variation is happening near the side wall, not near the axis. So near the axis, it's still axisymmetric, but away from the axis, you see it is non-axisymmetric. So the bubble may be axisymmetric, but the surrounding region is completely non-axisymmetric, as this particular plot also tells you. So near the axis, it's symmetric, axisymmetric, and the outside, it's non-axisymmetric, which is being seen in this particular movie. So the bubble is oscillating. There is no variation of the bubble along the theta direction, but the waves that is surrounding the flow, it oscillates. Okay, so there is a movement of the waves along the side walls, which is non-axisymmetric. So again, if I put a probe here, I can identify and pick the oscillating frequencies and the dominant frequencies that's associated with the flow. So if I do that, I get this particular signal. There is a large modulation of these waves. So it's clear that there are several frequencies associated with it. So the most dominant one is the one that I have peak here, 0.037, and the corresponding wave number, or the number of waves that's associated with that frequency, is 5, which you can clearly see here, the wave 5. Okay, so you can associate this wave to this particular frequency, and all these are subharmonics and other frequencies associated with it appearing in the system. So this is not yet turbulent because there are only very few frequencies here, and then you have this particular structure. And if I want to identify what structure is that, for example, for the same flow, if you look at the aspect ratio and the Reynolds number, the same structure, I can pick out these waves. Say, for example, this wave is 5, wave number is 5. So if you count the number of red peaks here, so that's 5. So the waves is perfectly matching with what you see there. So how I get this plot is even very easy. So you take the instantaneous flow field and subtract the mean flow field from it, and then take a Fourier transform along the theta direction to pick this particular precise mode. So you get that mode, and the 3D version of that mode is what you see here, which is showing you the helical nature of these modes. And if you look at it, it is starting from the stationary wall, and it is trying to spiral upward, and it's spiraling near the along the side walls, not at the center. The center is still at an axisymmetric region where you have that particular bubble that is oscillating. So the center is axisymmetric. Far away near the wall, you have all kinds of waves that is coming out of the side wall. Okay, so this is an instability that is coming from the side wall boundary line. And if you move further up in the Reynolds number, you have something called weak turbulence, where again you can have several frequencies like I have shown here. So these are from two different props that is kept, one near the axis, one near the side wall, and you see that there are many frequencies. Again, it's not fully turbulent because it's not a wideband spectrum that you see here. So it's but there are many frequencies which is approaching towards turbulence. So we call this as weak turbulent. Not just that, if you look at the modes, you see that these modes are wave-like structures, unlike in a highly turbulent flow. So these modes are quite wavy nature. So you have these waves plus these many frequencies. So we call this as weak turbulent state. And if you look at this, your k equals 1 frequency, or the most dominant frequency, you will see that there is only one wave, whereas k equals 4, which is closer to your side walls, not at the center, whereas the k equals 1 is closer to the center. So you say that at larger wave numbers, if the wave numbers increases, it's moving closer to the side wall. Okay, and then you go ahead, and at very high Reynolds number, you see the vortex breakdown bubble itself is twisted and tilted and stretched, and all kinds of strain that is being felt by the vortex breakdown bubble. And the shape is still persistent. The shape of the bubble, or the bubble, is still there, but it's a departure from the axisymmetric bubble. So we call this as the S-shaped bubble, and that we have seen it only for one particular case. We are still trying to figure out what happens to the other scenarios. So we all these being plotted here. So these are different scenarios: rotating waves, multiple waves, weak turbulence, S-shaped vortex, and all those things have been consistent with what we see here. Now it's more consistent if you look at the frequency and try to understand how the flow propagates into or move towards chaotic state. So if I take the time period of these waves, so for a steady flow up to 2,500, 600, it's a steady flow. But then suddenly it jumps to an oscillatory flow, which has only one frequency that I have already shown you the signal, and this tau zero is just one frequency. So from this state, it jumps to this particular state of some time period, and you march further in Reynolds number. It goes to a state where you have two frequencies, okay? And if you go further, it goes into multiple frequencies and to chaos. And if you come back in this, if you keep slowing down the Reynolds number, then there is a hysteresis that is seen here, because there is a region where you can pick only when you move forward and not backward. So there is a hysteresis also seen in this particular scenario. So if you plot the phase space, you would see clearly that why it is single frequency. So you see a one loop here. There are two loops here that's going precising on the flow. So this precision is also associated with the precision of the bubble. The bubble also precise, keeps rotating. Okay, so you have this case. For example, in this case, it's somewhere here. To 3,400 is somewhere here. And if you go to 5,000, you have all kinds of chaotic motion. So the method in which you make this phase space is something that, so there are questions, probably I can tell you that. It's coming out of one signal. It's called a time delay technique. So we draw this from that particular method. So this conclusion is made from that. So you have a state where it, the flow goes from steady to unsteady and then bifurcates again, then bifurcates. So these are called Hopf's bifurcation. So it bifurcates once, then it bifurcates again, then multiple times leading to chaos. So if you look at, if you want to find the relation between these bubbles and the helicity, that is where we have begun our study. So there was one publication which tells you that, the negative azimuthal vorticity, which is omega theta, the vorticity in the theta direction. Okay, so the moment you have a negative vorticity, that is the essential condition for vortex breakdown, or the necessary condition for the breakdown. But it was not a sufficient condition. Just by having a negative vorticity, you can have no breakdown scenario. As you see for Reynolds number 1600 here, this 1600 has a negative omega theta, but in this scenario there is no vortex breakdown. It is as I have shown you in the map and as well as in the SQDS experiment. This case is where you don't have a breakdown at all. It's a thin vortex line, vortex, axial vortex that's going from top to bottom. So having this negative vorticity is not a sufficient condition. It's only a necessary condition. So what we have shown here is that you can use helicity density to correlate the relation between the occurrence of vortex and the helicity, or the UZ equals 0 envelope. So we have taken the helicity. You can go ahead and write a evolution equation for helicity as well. But what we are going to do is we identify the helicity here. And this, for example, in 2200, your negative helicity is this blue region, and your helicity density, which is the inside is negative, outside is positive. So you have this bubble, which is exactly like the bubble that you have from uz equals 0. So your helicity is going to define the boundaries of the bubble as well. Now, if you plot the helicity along your axial helicity, or the velocity along your height of the cylinder, you see that wherever it cuts, you see the stagnation point, which exactly gives you the bubble size as well. Okay, so we thought we will just investigate more into helicity density, which is by a technique which you assume that the flow is axisymmetric. If it's axisymmetric, you can decompose the velocity field into two fields. One is the 2D field, and the other one is the the other component field. So you have, when you add these two, you get the normal velocity vector, which is your u theta plus ur plus uz. But now we have two vectors, which is v 2D and phi. Okay, so we have this, and then you have the associated omega. So associated with this two field, you have a omega, or the vorticity. Associated with this field, you have another set of vorticity. Now I can take the helicity by multiplying these two components. So I go ahead and identify the helicity based on these two components. Now these fields, one is along the r and z field, other one is in the theta field. This is valid only if you can actually separate the velocity field, which means that the energy associated with the flow should also be separate. You should be able to separate into two fields. So if I take or define my velocity in the 2D plane to be of this form, and velocity in the energy in the theta plane to be of this form, this is nothing but the kinetic energy associated with it, or the entire volume. So it looks like the energies are large apart from the 2D and the theta plane. So the energy is completely associated with the theta plane, where you can actually split the energy component from the 2D. Remember, energy is a scalar quantity, so I am not talking about two components in the directions, but I am talking about the velocity associated with the field that is given here and the field that is given here. Okay. So you are well within your limits to decompose the velocity field into the 2D plane and the normal to the 2D plane. And that is true for most Reynolds number under study and most of the aspect ratios that we have done. So you define a helicity based on these two velocity fields, okay? So which is v2d and omega phi. You get a quantity like this. Now, if you look at our publication here, what we have shown there is that this will exactly duplicate the bubble, and whether that is steady or unsteady, it exactly duplicates that bubble. Now this is, remember, this is with an axisymmetric assumption. So in the axisymmetry, only if there is an axisymmetry, we can decompose the velocity field into two. So if you look at this, the blue region is the uz, the definition of our bubble using uz contours, and the red is the definition using your HRZ criterion. So this condition exactly matches with the uz condition. Okay, so you could go ahead and claim that helicity is what is defining the bubble, or the topology of the bubble. So your uz is this quantity, as you look at here, it's nothing but the alignment of this particular vector into this particular vector. That's what this dot product will tell you, and the alignment gives you the helicity, and that is going to define the bubble structure. So this is valid for axisymmetric cases, whether it's steady or unsteady. But what we did is we went ahead and heuristically extended that to unsteady flows as well. Okay, and it's completely unsteady, completely non-axisymmetric, and we use the same method blindly. And then what we saw was the bubble defined by your UZ boundary, UZ equals 0 boundary, is same as the helicity defined by the bubble defined by the helicity equals 0, or the planar helicity equals 0. So there is something that is here which defines, which takes helicity as the fundamental quantity than most other cases. So you can equate these two scenarios. Not the story doesn't end here. This bubble surface is actually a surface which is going to block your, say, for example, mixing of your material from outside into the inside of the bubble. And if it's axisymmetric, a steady bubble, it is going to, the particles inside the bubble will stay inside the bubble, particle outside the bubble will stay outside the bubble, which is what we have shown here, where these are all the streamlines, and this is one half of the bubble, and you have a streamline that is closed here. So this stagnation point and this stagnation points are what we call as the manifolds, and this is unstable manifold, and the other one is stable manifold. And you will see that if it's a steady flow, these streamlines would be inside the bubble, and what is outside will always remain in the bubble. If it is 3D, then this is what I have shown here. Here in the top figure is the 2D one. If it's a 3D bubble, this is how it looks. And if you look at the plot, the streamlines, that's what you see. All the streamlines outside will not cross into the bubble. So the blue line is not crossing to the bubble size, which is shown in the red streamlines, which are from points inside the bubble, which is very clear from the movie that I'm going to show here. So in this movie, I have some green particles that is inside the bubble, okay, and some red and blue particles that's outside. One is closer to the surface, one is closer to the axis. So if I play this, say for example, I'm starting with this scenario where green is inside and then blue is somewhere in the axis. The red is closer to the side wall, and I play and I see that these particles inside the bubble will remain inside the bubble, and these two particles will remain outside the bubble. And this is a case where you have a steady bubble. The bubble is not moving, the flow is steady, there is no non-axisymmetry, it's a fully axisymmetric steady case, a 3D computation. So I'm going to march in time the particle movement. So the particle inside the bubble will stay inside the bubble. So there are no green particles crossing the bubble. There are no blue particle going into the bubble or the red particle going into the bubble. So these bubbles act as a barrier for your mixing process. If there is a mixing process, say for example, if you have something like a Sol combustor where you have a large bubble that is going to hold the flame in the gas turbine engine, and if the bubble is there, that bubble is not going to contribute to the mixing, but it will only hold the flame. Okay? So that is a device that has been coming up recently, which has not been in the commercial side, but it has been investigated by several people how to hold the flame in the gas turbine engine. Now this is for a steady case, steady axisymmetry. The moment you have an unsteady flow or a non-axisymmetry, where I cannot draw the streamlines because that's changing with time, you have to believe me that to begin with, the green bubble, say for example, the green particles are inside the bubble, the blue particles are closer to the axis, and the red particles are closer to the side wall, and you march in time. Remember, the bubble is oscillating. For this particular case, the bubble is oscillating. This is a completely unsteady asymmetric flow. And you will see that these bubbles are ejecting out through the stagnation points, which are the manifolds. So this particle will, this green particle will just come out of through the axis at the point, and the blue particles will also go inside the bubbles as it goes through. So these points that I have shown there in the previous schematic diagram will act as a manifold which will suck in the particles into the bubble and out of the bubble. Yeah. Some questions? Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but we are running out of time actually.
Yeah, fine. So I am going to stop my talk here. So another 2 minutes?
Yes, sure, sure.
Yeah. So I conclude this particular session where I have the entire flow regime. If you look at the, say, let's take 2.5 and I march in Reynolds number, then I should go from a steady case to unsteady case, breakdown, unsteady, and then goes to a chaotic motion, which is what I have shown in this particular box, where I have a steady case, then I have a half bifurcation, then I have a second half bifurcation, I have multiple frequencies, then go to chaotic motion where I have a large number of frequencies that is present in the scenario. If I take a horizontal sector, similar thing can happen. So, but the number of points I have here is very small. So you have a steady, in this region, there is a steady flow, there is no vortex motion, then you have a breakdown, and then you have multiple breakdowns, and then it goes to a completely unsteady state. So I conclude my talk here, where, axial vortex has breakdowns, and then you identify the breakdowns, several regimes of the breakdown, and it depends on the shape and the speed at which the vortex breakdown happens. So the structures also differ in the parameter space. The route to chaos is half bifurcation. So you have successive half bifurcation, which is period, the number of frequencies associated with the flow keep increasing, and then you reach to the chaotic motion. And we have also seen that, the helicity that we redefine by decomposing the velocity field defines the breakdown bubble completely. Okay, and the bubble is unwanted thing in a material transport mixing. Okay, with that, I think I will stop. This particular effect of heating on this is something which I'm going to skip. Okay. So any questions? I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, sir, for delivering such a wonderful talk. Any participant having any questions, he or she can ask.
Sir, I have questions. Sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. Sir, in that slide, sir, you on there one condition. If in slide 39.
Slide 39. Okay. Okay. This is 39.
Sir, one condition is there that if Z is greater than, is less than or equal to something, condition is there.
This one? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
Sir, if UZ is will be the greater or equal to 0, then what will be the condition of the experiment?
No, what we are saying is this boundary is defined by HRZ equals 0. So inside the bubble, inside this region is HR equals less than 0. Outside is HR is greater than 0. Okay, so the definition of the bubble is what we have given here. So all the fluid particles inside this bubble, all the points inside this bubble will have helicity less than 0. All the points outside this bubble will have helicity greater than 0. Like what we have shown here. Okay, so inside this bubble you have greater than 0, this gray region, as helicity less than 0. Outside is greater than 0. Okay, that's all we meant.
Okay, sir. Sir, and one more question, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
in Vorticity, sir,
Ah.
there is one more question, sir. If there is no RNA pellet
There-
after isopropanol spin, then just two liquid phases, what will be the condition?
I didn't understand. Once again, if there is no
Sir, if there will be no RNA pellet,
RNA.
yes, sir.
RNA. What do you mean by RNA? I didn't follow that. Is this something I have shown in the slide or?
No, sir. Leave it at that one.
No, you no, please, we can. RNA means what? I'm not following the question. Somebody can help me here?
Yes, Nirmal, can you specify what is RNA?
RM. Okay.
It is mentioned in chat box, sir.
Okay, I can't figure out anything. Okay. Okay, any other question? I didn't follow the question. Maybe, Nirmal, you can talk to me in private. I can try to figure out what you are trying to say.
Sure, sir. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any other participant having any question? Okay, then. Thank you very much, Dr. Samin, sir.
Yeah,
On behalf of Mechanical Engineering Department ADIT, I express sincere gratitude towards you for accepting our invitation and delivering such a wonderful talk. You have started from fundamentals of vertex flow and you have shown some great simulation work that you have done in this particular field. I hope it would be useful to our participants. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. If there are any questions, anybody can ask me over the mail or something. Okay, please go ahead. And thank you, Professor Thakur, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. There is one announcement for participant. The second session will start at 11:45 AM of Dr. Krishnakant Agrawal, Professor IIT Delhi. So you can join at 11:45. Thank you, everyone.